Good morning, Concord High School, and welcome to this morning's panel discussion. I want to take a moment first to thank each of our participants in this morning's conversation. I want to thank them and welcome them to Concord High School. To my immediate left, from Colby Sawyer, is Mark Clark. Next in line, in no special rank order, is Mark Donnelly. Thank you, Betsy. Is Mark Donnelly from Northeastern University. Next is Denine Garnett from NHTI. Paul Sunday from Dartmouth College. Robert McGann from the University of New Hampshire. Julie, I apologize. Let me jump back there. Julie Landman from St. Anselm College. And I was right down to the very end, Ryan Patton from Plymouth State University. I want to thank each of our panelists for agreeing to come to speak with us today. And really, as much as this is going to be an introduction for us to you, really both sides of the party, you're going to get to know us as well. Concord High School, very proudly I want to say is an excellent high school. We have a committed staff who have worked incredibly hard just continuously improving the ways that we deliver instruction to students, never afraid to ask the questions that are the most challenging. What can I do to improve instruction for my students? And that question has launched so many different initiatives right here at Concord High School, but on a daily basis, it just provides tremendous momentum in a very vibrant building. Our faculty are just getting off of a school year. We graduated our students this past Saturday, and this week I'm happy to see people in a little relaxed mode, dressed down but very engaged in the work that they've been doing. Today we're going to have a conversation, really, and I want to frame it around the question of how do we best report for ourselves, for our students, our families, and those third parties, whoever they might be, on their academic achievement at Concord High School. There are various ways that schools throughout our state, throughout our nation do that, but the focus of today, I mean, these schools that are represented in today's panel discussion really represent the range of schools and colleges our students make application to, and we know that there's a third-party audience that is very interested in coming to know who our students are, and we want to make sure that we're doing that to the best of our ability. Co-moderating this morning is Mr. Stephen Rothenberg. Steve, stand up, because Concord TV is also right here. So, we did not choose our outfits, by the way. We can point out some slight differences, from stains on ties to no stains on ties. But today is going to be it's going to be a great conversation, and so we invite, as we have questions for you, please don't hesitate to turn some back to us as well.
Just to loosen us up a little bit, I made a joke this morning. I'll be very delicate about it. Whether you're 17 or 51 like me, we had a get-together last night. You don't want to have too much fun the night before you have to be with some school counselors from colleges. So my question is, right off the bat from New England Secondary School Consortia, we're going to read a statement by them, and we're going to ask you to sort of respond to it. The headline is, and I'm going to add slightly to it, 75 New England institutions of higher education state that competency-based or proficiency-based diplomas do not disadvantage applicants. I found the statement "do not disadvantage" probably the minimum criteria that folks in the audience are thinking about, but their vision extends further to, is it an advantage? Tom said something earlier. I just want to modify what you said earlier. You used the word academic performance, but I think we all understand that it's not just academic performance. We are continuing to explore work-study practices, soft skills, research, all the pieces of the puzzle that align to that. So as that opening statement goes, 75 New England institutions of higher education state that competency-based or proficiency-based diplomas do not disadvantage applicants. We'll allow you to each give an opening sort of remark on your thoughts on that statement and how it applies to your institution and your vision. And why don't we just, what we'll do is we'll start with Mike, and every time we start a question, we'll start a person going down the line.
Sounds good. Can folks hear me if I don't use the microphone? Okay.
Yeah, we suggest you use it. It's just a big room.
How's this?
Much better.
Excellent. Sure. So for us at Colby Sawyer College, and I've been at Colby Sawyer for 12 years now, I came up on the counseling side, so working with you folks, students, applicants, their families. I did that for about 8 years, and now I'm more on our sort of software and marketing side, but still sort of overseeing our review process and helping with that. For us, we work with so many different students from around the country and the globe, and there are so many different transcripts and way that institutions or schools report to us how students have performed. And we accept all of them, and we work with all of them, and we sort of adapt and do a careful and close review. So I would agree that it is not a disadvantage to go with a competency-based. So that's just, as far as an opening statement, that we welcome what you provide to us, and if we have questions, we of course sort of follow up with you to learn more.
All right, good morning. So again, my name is Julie. I'm at St. Anselm College. I've been there for 3 years. Previous to that, I spent 8 years at Wentworth Institute of Technology in Boston. So 2 very different institutions. So hopefully an interesting perspective on this from both sides. So from the perspective of just my time in admission, we too are open to really whatever you are looking to provide to us. I think it's wonderful that you have us here today. We love when schools will ask for our opinion so that we can make sure that it is not a disadvantage for a student, so that we are understanding what we're seeing across our desk in a student's application. So we too have what you would consider to be like territory managers. So all of our counselors are responsible for a specific region, whether that's China, whether that's New Jersey or New Hampshire. So part of our job and our responsibility as a counselor is to get to know the high schools. We get to know counselors, we get to know faculty if we have the opportunity. We look at the school profile, we will look at the transcript. If there's anything that we don't understand or have questions about, we reach out to the school. We reach out to the school counselors so that we can better understand the transcript. And that for us is a huge part and really has become really the major part of the review process for us, is to understand the student and understand the transcript that we're looking at as it relates to that high school. So I too would say it is absolutely not a disadvantage for a student.
Good morning, I'm Mark Donnelly from Northeastern University. My background, I came up through public education as a teacher and an administrator before I went into higher education. I've been with Northeastern for 5 years now. We are grappling a bit with competency-based transcripts only because the numbers we're getting right now are not large. And we are trying to find a way to really delve into it. We have a committee within our office for this upcoming school year to look into both competency-based and narrative-based transcripts to see how we can really unpack them a little bit better. Frankly, right now we are working on how do we convert them into numbers, which is obviously undoing the point of a competency-based transcript. And we don't want that to be the case. I mean, I think this is a very common movement. I think we're going to see more of them. I think it's on us now to catch up and figure out how do we really look at them for what they are as a competency-based transcript rather than shifting them into numbers. I mean, that sort of undoes the good work that everyone puts into these competency-based transcripts, and we will get there. I think we're going to see more. I also think as schools start to make the move away or make the move towards being test optional, and transcripts become an even bigger part of the evaluation, you're going to see more pressure on higher ed to really get on board and figure out where we're going with competency transcripts.
Clint, I think there's some music still in the background. I think we sympathize with your statement of conversion. I think this audience knows that well. NHTI?
Hi, I'm Deneen Garnett from NHTI. Is this on?
Yes, speak a little closer to it.
Okay, sorry. Hi, Deneen Garnett from NHTI. When thinking about reviewing transcripts, I kind of have two different answers depending on the program or the major that a student might be applying to. For NHTI, the mission is to be really open access. So for many of our programs, there aren't specific prerequisites. There isn't a minimum GPA. So certainly that's not going to be cumbersome to have a competency-based transcript in that area. It's just going to be more helpful information for our academic advisors when they're working with students. For our more competitive programs, it is a little bit different. We are still looking at specific grades and specific courses, and that is, again, as Mike just said, we're looking to convert into grades to be able to say the student has the equivalent of a C or better in these specific areas. So again, it is something that we're looking at as well to try to figure out to the best of our ability what would be considered satisfactory progress in areas like biology, chemistry for our healthcare programs, or the mathematics for our STEM-based programs.
And the fact that you're in New Hampshire, would you say there's a percentage of applications that come as competency-based versus non-competency-based?
I mean, it's still fairly low for us as well.
Give us a rough percentage.
I would say probably maybe 5%.
Wow.
You know, there's certain schools that are local, like Pittsfield, that are competency-based, but they're still utilizing a scale. Their transcripts are still indicating ABC, even though their assessment is competency-based. So a lot of those schools have chosen to kind of go in that direction, which certainly simplifies things to a certain extent for us, but is something that each school would certainly have to decide what makes the most sense for their assessment and what they need to do for their students.
Excellent. Dartmouth?
Good morning. Paul Sunday from Dartmouth again. So I'm pretty sure that Dartmouth has a letter on that website where you pulled that quote from, kind of affirming that, so we're very much on board, I would say. I think what's come up here, just to echo a couple things. One, there are literally thousands of secondary schools in our applicant pool, represented in our applicant pool, and each of them has their own grading system, curriculum, potentially ranking system, and it's our job to figure out each one individually and assess students within the context of that individual circumstance. So we're very comfortable shifting from one circumstance to another. I think another point here to echo is I think there's a tremendous variation in transcripts among schools that are non-competency based and schools that are competency based, and so for us there's this spectrum, and I actually think that admissions people don't always know if they're reading a competency based transcript, because it can look a lot like another transcript. And so I think the issue is actually more about how are you representing things very specifically, and then how do we sort that out and we figure that out. But I'm very confident, very comfortable with one system or another.
Hi, my name is Rob McGann from the University of New Hampshire. We too freely and willingly accept competency-based transcripts. I would guess somewhere in the 10 to 20% range of the transcripts that we receive are some variation on the competency-based transcript model. And I would emphasize that, some variation. There are a lot of variations on the theme. Not all are true competencies. Some are more of a hybrid model. Some incorporate both the competency-based and the traditional grading methodology. So there's lots of possibilities. And that the message here is that colleges, I think responsible colleges, will work with you. We're not going to dictate to the high school communities across the country what grading methodologies you should use. That's a local decision. But with that, making that local decision, the responsibility then becomes for the high school community to properly communicate and articulate what the nature of your grading scales and systems are. So good information on the transcript, excellent information on the school profile, detailed information on your website, and it is the responsibility of the college to spend the time to learn about the nature of that grading methodology. Some example, when we first started seeing greater numbers of competency-based transcripts in New Hampshire, some years ago, we would start meeting with individual schools and have them teach us, essentially, what are the nuances and what's the nature and specifics of your new competency-based evaluation model. And that allows us to, again, properly evaluate the student's application within the context of your high school. And that's an important concept. We're always evaluating kids' applications within the context of your local environment. Kids typically don't have a choice where they go to high school, so we're never going to hold a student responsible or penalize them in any way for choices made by the adults in the community. So that's an important concept to appreciate as well. And then lastly, as Paul indicated, we see dozens, if not hundreds, of different types of transcripts and evaluation models over the course of a year. So your model that you're going with will not be new or surprising to us, whatever that model ultimately ends up being. It'll be just one more in a series of variations that we're routinely seeing and take time and effort to understand properly so that, again, the student is being properly served in this admissions process. So summary statement would be that students will never be penalized for the grading methodologies chosen by the school in question.
Hi, Ryan Patton from Plymouth State. I work with specifically just our New Hampshire students here, and I really have no new information to add after 6 people before me. So pretty much, to sum up, yeah, there's no disadvantage for any type of competency-based transcript. For us at Plymouth, in New Hampshire, competency-based transcripts make about 7% of the total schools that we work with, probably. So there's really no disadvantage. We're going to take whatever the information is on there in order to evaluate that student and see if they are going to be prepared to enter our school and be successful in their first year. I think a second part of that question might have been if there's any advantage to it, and I think that's going to vary depending on how the transcript is set up and what the school decides to share. For instance, just as an example, in higher education, there's a bigger conversation going on how do you measure things like grit and different types of social and interpersonal skills and how that factors into them being successful in college. And if a competency-based transcript has those different types of evaluators and how they've been developing those skills in their classrooms and inside of their overall high school setting, that's really good for us to know, and then we can pass on that information to different people like our faculty advisors or those other staff members on campus that might be working with those students. So there's no disadvantage, and the advantage is going to depend on what the school decides to share.
Ryan, in just a moment, we're going to look at some of those other questions we have with respect to those social expectations, those other indicators of a student's achievement. But for the panel, and I'll throw this out for anyone to respond to at this point, are there times where your admissions officers come upon a transcript and they feel that we've found the gold standard? This is the kind of transcript we just love looking at, or does that not exist?
I'll take a cowardly way out. I don't think it exists. There are some ideas and themes that I think will unify good transcripts regardless of the grading mechanism. One is layout and organization of the transcript, how well and how clearly the information is shared. Contextual information is also very helpful to see. Understanding what the grading system is like, and if that's easily referenced, that's a very helpful thing to see. And then, again, internal decisions are made on this across high schools across the country. Are you showing just end-of-year grades, semester grades, term grades, whatever the model happens to be? But the clarity of presentation is most important, and the context of those grades is critical. How you achieve that, really up to you, but again, I don't think there's any one single gold standard that I would point to.
So I just want to follow up and not do this in order. Folks a few questions that just can be anybody take it, and if there's not a lot of response to it, we'll move on to the next one. But let's go back to the habits mind, New Hampshire Cause and Work Study practices. You articulate that well, how you look at it. Is anybody else anything more to that? That's a crossroads for us as we sort of devise our model. Does anybody have any insight into you receive a traditional transcript or a competency-based transcript? You receive even references, wherever that fits into the model. When you start getting a picture of the student's non-academic, let's call it. Obviously they're interwoven, but let's just call it non-academic for the sake of argument. Where does that fit in? Where does it fit? Like you're sitting in your offices going over applications. How is it weighted? Because we need to hear that as far as our design goes. We need to know, we take a lot of effort to go down that road. What's the value of that road? What's the value proposition?
Well, I know when we are looking at an application, there's a couple of pieces we rate. There's an academic rating that is strictly just that. But there is then also, we call it a counselor rating, but it is looking at all those other pieces, all the non-academic pieces. Did a student show leadership within their school? Did they get involved in as much as they could? Another big piece, and this is, I guess, shifting back to the academic side, how well did they challenge themselves? You know, did they, because we recalculate everyone's GPA on a 5.0 weighted scale. So if your student's taking the APs and the honors, we're looking for that because, again, they're challenging themselves. As Ryan said, that's somewhat of an example of showing some grit, some determination. But we try not to have just the numbers make the decision. We're looking at what will, you know, as I tell students when I visit schools, everyone who gets into Northeastern is going to be smart. What else do you bring to the table? Do you bring leadership? Do you bring a vision? Do you bring something? Are you an entrepreneur? You know, what else are you going to bring to our campus besides being a smart student? Because they all are, which is a wonderful thing, and I don't mean to minimize that. So we say holistic, but we really do mean it's a holistic review. There are times that certainly we're bound, like everyone, by some of the numbers we look at, but we are trying to outgrow that. We're trying to figure out how do we get a picture of who the student is. Unfortunately, we do not offer interviews just because of volume of applicants. So we try to look at how do we determine who this young person is? What are they going to bring? And again, you know, trying to determine grit is a very tough thing. Trying to determine ambition is a tough thing, but those are some of the characteristics we're looking for.
I would say that in our process, in this notion of holistic, it's important to understand that, I mean, I think, and Rob has illuminated this, we're always looking at a transcript along with the secondary school profile. So, and that's kind of the decoder of the transcript. And you know, one of the things I think about is what does this individual school value? What matters to them? How is that reflected in their profile? And then how is the student performed within the context of the opportunities and values of their secondary school? And are they outstanding in that context? And so, you know, historically we've looked at the transcript as serving one important role in this and a foundational role. But in addition to being paired with the secondary school profile, it's paired with secondary teacher recommendations and a counselor recommendation. And so when we talk about habits of mind and you know, demonstrating grit and engagement beyond what you would think in a letter grade or number grade, the recommendations have served an important part of that. You know, one of the things that it's gross oversimplification, but I think in some of the more narrative-based evaluations that we see, it's pieces of the recommendation, what I would think of as a recommendation, moving over to the transcript. And that's okay, it's not a bad thing. But we have a process that's gone on for decades looking at both sides of that coin, not just raw academic performance, but intellectual development, and the recommendation being a key part of that.
Along those lines, this past year we've been experimenting with a new application review rubric that tries to get to and quantify some of these other aspects. And as part of that, just to add on, we're looking at the students' writing, specifically their essay that they submit, their ability to speak to the topic they've chosen, the complexity, grammar and punctuation. And then also for us, you know, for leadership, we talk about engagement. I think leadership can be a part of that. They're in student government, or they're a captain of a team, but engagement in their community, or are they working a part-time job after school? Are they helping to care for a younger sibling because their parent works a lot? So we're trying through this rubric to include those other pieces along with the academic piece in a more formal way. So this was our kind of beta year to test that, but we're looking to include it more and give it more weight.
I'll just add a few other thoughts. The non-academic variables that come into play in an admissions application will vary in significance by school and by circumstance. So at UNH, for example, you know, obviously the first order of business, and it's probably true for every college in the country, is verifying that the student has the academic ability to be successful. And that looks different for different students, so not everybody's going to fall into a narrowly defined definition of academic readiness. Some students are working their way towards that, others have more uneven pathways towards that goal, but regardless regardless, the main function of an admissions office, broadly stated, is to verify the student has the academic capacity to be successful at that institution. The non-academic component to that process, and I'll use that word liberally, in the sense that recommendations are outside the academic realm in the sense that they're not grades, but they are very important in certain circumstances, and that will vary by institution as well. But they add depth and understanding to what the student has accomplished. They help explain things on the academic record. They help us understand what path the student has chosen and developed through the course of their high school career. And that information can be very helpful context to deciphering and interpreting the academic record that the student has assembled over the course of their high school years. So maybe they had some family challenges in the sophomore year, or they've encountered some medical issues in their junior year. Those can be explained and contextualized to help us make a better judgment about that student's academic readiness for college-level work. Another thing I'll mention, because I think this is sometimes a term that gets a lot of use in the admissions conversation, is this idea of leadership. Leadership is important, but I'll be clear. We have 3,100 kids enrolled to come into UNH this fall. I can assure you they are not all leaders. And that's probably true for every college in the country. So leadership means different things. I think the word I heard mentioned earlier, which I think is a more appropriate word, is engagement. Whether or not the student rises to the mantle of leadership in whatever organization they choose is somewhat irrelevant. What is important is a student is showing a continuous path of development that allows them to be engaged in a meaningful way, because success at the college level, as it is in the high school level, is often associated with being actively engaged. How you manifest that engagement is really a personal choice. It could be work, it could be clubs, it could be sports, it could be religion, it could be any number of different venues. But we want students to find ways to be engaged. But we also acknowledge that not everybody's going to achieve that level of engagement during the course of their high school career, and might be ready for it just through normal maturation and developmental processes when they get to college. So a student's not going to be penalized in our admissions process, and that's partly a function of mission. We're a public university, and we have an access component to our goals. That access component is tempered with expectations for academic performance, certainly, but you're not always going to have a uniformly assigned or a developed concept of what it means to be engaged, quote unquote, or leader, quote unquote. There's a lot of different interpretations of what that looks like, so we would never want a student to preclude themselves from consideration from a particular institution across the country because they have a more narrowly defined understanding of what engagement is, what leadership is, or how they're defining their own academic success. That's a conversation that should take place within the school, but also should take place within the context of the application process to the schools that they're considering. And each institution will view that academic development possibly in different ways.
In speaking about student engagement and what the various schools and colleges look at, one of the things we sometimes observe are students that will amass as many clubs and activities that they can possibly join, AP courses that they can possibly enlist, and you know, there's sometimes missing is the joy factor, you know, or a loss of vision of why I'm doing this. Could you comment on, you know, how much do you look at in terms of quantity versus, you know, the depth that a student could pursue?
Sure. So, so for us, again, we really pick apart all of the pieces in the application outside of the academic qualifications. So it might be something that comes in through a recommendation letter. It could be something the student wrote about in their essay, their resume that is submitted. So all of those things for us are really important. For us, we consider it to be impact. What sort of impact will they have on our campus? And for students, that comes in, you know, a broad range of things. So for us, we're looking at really the quality of the involvement. Obviously, if a student has the opportunity to get involved in many different things and, you know, be involved over 4 years or beyond, that's wonderful. But we really want to know that students are passionate about what they're doing, whether that again is something through their community, a family responsibility that they have, a part-time job, an internship. Any of those things for us are really important. So for us, it's really the quality and the passion that they have for those things. And again, I think, you know, it's great if a student discovers that while they're in high school, but we also want to dig a little bit deeper to see if maybe they just haven't had the opportunity to figure it out just yet, or haven't, you know, been exposed to that just yet. So for us, that college could be the time where they flourish and they're able to discover their passion and get involved with something that maybe wasn't available at their high school or in their community, or they just weren't ready for yet. So those are all of the things that we really dig for in the application, and when I say dig, we dig, which is good. We're really looking at every single piece that's submitted to us in the application.
So I would definitely echo quality over quantity. And we try to, and I think the term that I like is we try to look at students in context of where they're coming from. I said earlier, I spoke of leadership. I'd like to clarify, leadership within the school in general doesn't have to be leadership of a specific club. But by being engaged, I guess that's more what I'm looking at when I talk about leadership. But we definitely look at what did a student do based on the opportunity they have. One of my other regions, along with New Hampshire, is northern New Jersey. I was reading a student from Newark who every day after school was working to help support their family. I don't have the expectation that that student is going to be in dozens of school clubs. They don't have the luxury of that. Another school, probably less than 10 miles away, I visited, had valet parking for the students when they got to school. Those students have almost limitless resources at hand, and I do expect to see, maybe a little more, because they do have the luxury of being engaged and joining things and stretching themselves out. So it's very much, contextual. We definitely, as you said, the word dig is a great word. We really try to figure out what opportunities does the student really have. And again, those are extremes, but there's many cases, that student from the suburbs who on the surface looks like, well, I look at your town, you should be able to do this and that, but you have to dig deeper. You have to look at their essay, the counselor recommendation, and get those pieces that aren't obvious so you really understand what did they really have the chance to do based on what was going on in their lives.
Two points, hopefully quick. When we're going through our review process, we're interested in what does this candidate care about? What are their priorities? What are the things that animate them and motivate them? And usually those aren't a dozen things. And we tend to look across the entire candidacy, and you're hearing about these from us, you're hearing about these different parts. The applicant fills out their part, and they talk about their activities and their essay, and there are probably supplemental questions for different colleges to which they're applying. All of the content we're getting from the secondary school, the recommendations, potentially interviews at many places, standardized testing. I mean, there's so many different pieces of the application. We're looking for themes across all of that. So when we think about intellectual engagement, for example, it's probably going to show up in multiple places, and it should. And the more times we see something kind of poking up in that candidacy in different parts, the more seriously we will take that, because we see that as an indication of this is where somebody is most engaged, this is what they care about, that's why I'm seeing this over and over again. And it's a similar thing with activities. And kind of the Common App list of activities, for example, is supposed to be in priority order. And so the ones at the top of that are the ones that we're going to attend to more closely. There are probably more years up, there are probably more hours per week, or more weeks per year. Those are where we expect to see the deepest investment. And the things down at the bottom, probably less so. And so we won't attend to those as closely. But if something shows up in an interview as an important priority for a student, but maybe isn't as high on their activities list, then we start going, all right, how do we knit this together? And we're trying to draw themes across, and usually it's not many things. We'll see many applicants who go through processes of discovery, and that's fine too. But wherever you are, we're trying to understand that. So my second point, which maybe puts this on its head a little bit, is one of my concerns is applicants, I mean, it's that Heisenberg uncertainty principle, right? You can't measure something without changing it. The act of measuring changes what is being measured. The application is a really complex instrument that I think can, for some, change the behavior of a student. And the way I think about this is that there are more than 4,000 secondary schools available, or post-secondary schools available to students in high school. They have tremendous, tremendous choice. The students, I think, are actually far more selective than the colleges, even the most selective colleges. When you do the math on this, I think that's irrefutable that the students are more selective than the schools. But the concern about selectivity and what do I need to do to get in, I think for some can obscure what do I care about, what is it that I want to do, and I will find a place that will enable me to do that. And I think to the extent students can feel that sense of ownership that I'm talking about, I think they'll be well served in life, but I actually think they'll be well served in this process as well, because the point about passion and kind of what is it that I care about, the students who are naturally and genuinely engaged and excited about what they're doing are more appealing as applicants. The students who are marching through the process and putting up what they think we need to see, I think it's harder for those students to show the excitement and depth of engagement and commitment that we're going to be attracted to. And so if students looking at us as options among which they will choose, as opposed to looking at themselves as commodities among which we will choose, I think the former students are going to be in a better position in this process and in life.
All right. Oh, just one other point to respond to the part of your question about course selection, AP, all that sort of thing. Certainly we want kids to take challenging sets of courses during their high school career, but the important caveat that we share with students in our conversations with them and their parents is that we want students to take the most challenging set of courses that are available to them within their schools, and importantly, that they're prepared for. And that prepared for bit is really critical. We don't want students taking a course because they think it's going to help them get into college, which is the wrong reason to take a course. Rather, we want kids to continue their development by taking incrementally more challenging courses each year. Certainly a lot of kids are applying to college who've taken AP, honors, running start type courses or the equivalent regardless of where they're going to go to school. But the important thing is to see that continuation of development of skills and abilities, and frankly the subject matter teachers and the school counselors are the ones best positioned to make a judgment on whether or not that student is ready for that next level challenge. I think we've all on this panel probably seen the kid who's taken pre-calculus and got a C or a C minus and thought it was a good idea to take AP Calculus. Probably isn't a good idea, and probably the math teacher probably could have confirmed that. So we'd really encourage students to have those conversations with the subject matter teacher and the school counselor to decide whether or not the AP, honors, or whatever the label happens to be is the right course. Getting into college at most of our places is not dependent on taking honors and AP courses. It's dependent upon having a comprehensive set of skills that are reinforced through logical and smart course selections, and you're taking a rigorous set of courses every single year of your high school career, not just the sophomore, junior year, but first year and senior year as well. So those are the kind of, again, conversations we'd like to encourage.
I'm going to change the pace of the question slightly, so just bear with me a little bit. We have one college on this stage who receives a disproportionate number of our graduates, which is NHTI. It's in the ballpark of 70 plus per year. It's a very large percentage of our class goes there. So my question is going to have two perspectives. One is NHTI's perspective, and then the other is the college's and university's perspective. We have Concord is a classic, totally mixed socioeconomic town, meaning we have a whole spectrum of economic conditions. We have a number of students here who will be first-generation college, folks who are making minimal income, huge process for them. So my question is, and NHTI, you'll be the only one person on one side of the fence here, and then everybody else will be on the other side of the fence. You have students who are considering a blended college track. They're doing conceivably running start classes here to sort of start the ball rolling. They are doing NHTI potentially for a 2+2 type model. My world is some career and technical people in the same boat. So we have students who nearly have to go on that model based on some economic factors. How do you view them? from a college perspective, university perspective. NHTI, how do you view these 6 other people in the rest of the world on their perspective, on their willingness to work with you on students who are going on these roads? In particular, NHTI, is, among all the 7 community colleges, is known as that college prep community college. It was known that for many, many years that you would be going there and moving on. So feel free, again, take it if you want to take it. You can pass on the question. But I think NHTI will have one perspective, and then the other 6 may have a different perspective, or their perspective. So let me open it up to who wants to take it.
Sure, I'll start with So many of our students do specifically come to NHTI with the idea of transfer in mind, and there are not just admissions, but certainly our academic advisors who are specifically working with those students to achieve those goals. There are a lot of different specific articulations in place, which I think are really important for students to be aware of, that there are these connections, these areas of collaboration, cooperation with many different institutions, both public and private. So there are a lot of different opportunities for students to be able to stay local. For a lot of them, again, it's economics. They're looking to save money initially and take core classes that would be easy to transfer. So we certainly work with many, many students that are in that position. We have a number that are coming because we have the specific program, and it might be their terminal degree, but many are looking to continue on for that bachelor's program. So we certainly make sure that we have a lot of communication with the 4-year institutions to make that transition a lot easier. For some students, they are taking remedial courses that they need because initially they were not able to get into that 4-year institution. So again, we're working with a lot of those students that need to develop the academic skills, that need to develop the soft skills of, they need to be able to self-advocate, they need to be resilient, and they build those kinds of skills and abilities at our institution, and are therefore able to be more successful as they transition into the 4-year experience. And I think that's an important part of the community college mission, is to build them, not just academically, but as people, as citizens, and in leadership areas as well, so that they are able to be successful, whether they're going directly into the workforce or continuing on at a 4-year degree.
So I'll take this one. With Plymouth, we try to make transferring as easy as possible, because I think a really great way to put it, as Rob said earlier, is there's a lot of different paths that many different students can take. With Plymouth, we have a significant amount of first-generation students that come to our campus every single year. A lot of them are transfer students. I think our total transfer population each year is anywhere between 200 to 250 students, and we try to make that as seamless as possible, whether it's anything from 2+2 agreements to dual admissions to various articulation agreements with any community colleges within New Hampshire or New England. We try to make it as small but painful, that's the right phrasing, as what's that?
As painless?
As painless, thank you. That's it. It's early in the morning still. As painless of a process as we possibly can make it. We're also seeing a good rise in students who are looking to take college credits while they're in high school, whether it's Running Start, whether it's going to be anything coming as an AP credit, if it's anything like SNU in the classroom, and we try to make that also as easy as possible to make sure when they come in, they can possibly come in with a jump start on their first semester of college, if that's what they're looking to do. So it can be any number of reasons, as Deneen said. It could be economics. It could be something where they want to stay closer to home and then move on afterwards, or it could be that maybe they realized their senior year of high school, they didn't put in the effort that they should have been putting in, and they need to have a different start first and then move on to a different type of college afterwards. So it could be any number of reasons, and I think a lot of us try to make it as easy as possible for those students.
And I think if anybody else takes the question, I would be negligent not to target. The word smooth implies that students, and I just want to get us past the opening word smooth and get into the deeper understanding of how open are you to making sure that their credits transfer, that these students have agreements, that they don't leave 2 years of NHTI or whatever community college and they come into the university and now they're a sophomore again. Because the spirit of it, I think that statement represents many of our students. I think that is a reality, and I'm not picking on you, it's just I want to make sure this dialogue gets past it's a good idea to, you know what, we really bend over backwards to make sure if that student followed a pathway we described, that they will enter as a junior and they have all the rights of a junior at that college. I think that is a deep question that many of us see at this school on a regular basis.
And I'll just add that part of my conversation a lot of times with students is to make sure they're having that conversation with the four-year representatives, that making sure that they're going to be taking the coursework that is appropriate. Our advisors are very well trained. As I said, there's a lot of communication with transfer offices at a lot of locations to make it easier for students, and again, developing pathways and articulation so it's in black and white specifically. This course will transfer as this to that school. But again, for a lot of students, that there might not have a specific 2+2 articulation for where they want to go. We find that a lot of students are transferring after a year. They're not necessarily completing an entire degree, even though we have a lot of those 2+2 articulations. So again, really trying to be individual, working with that student, talking about what are their goals, what are they looking to do, but also saying to them, ultimately, it's going to be the decision of the 4-year what they will accept or will not accept, and to have that conversation early. What are their transfer policies? What are they looking for in transfer candidates? So potentially for those students that are participating in a dual admission program, that's a really great pathway that is simplified. There's a specific application, again, specific courses that they should be taking along those routes. But again, we'll have students that are going to schools out of state. I had a student that's transferring to Mississippi State. We don't have articulations with them. So it was very important to say, so have you talked with them about what are their admissions policies and what they're looking for with the specific kind of degree that you're looking to pursue?
And for us on the 4-year side, in order to try to ensure that smoothness as much as possible, we do have specific transfer admissions counselors, and they meet with our counterparts over on the 2-year colleges very regularly to make sure that our curriculum, as it's being updated, is still in line with the curriculum being offered at the 2-year college, and making sure that those credits will come in. A great example, my colleague Alex, he graduated from Laconia High School, went off to Lakes Region Community College, and then he came into Plymouth with 70 credits that were coming right in place of classes he didn't have to take anymore. And that's a significant amount of credits. I mean, with Plymouth, the average student will come out with about 30 credits each year, so that puts him into his junior year already when he first came in. So it's a lot of communication. Another big piece, again, I think as Deneen mentioned, is communication on campus. It's not just communicating with us, but making sure that they're communicating with their advisors at their community college as far as if this is their end goal and their trajectory, what do they need to do there each and every semester to make sure that they're going to be able to achieve that and not be put behind, and that they're taking the correct classes and they're achieving the right grades in order for those credits to then transfer in. Yeah, like the database. Yeah, another great thing, as Robert just reminded me, there's a lot of great tools that students can take a look at as well. So for instance, there is a database within New Hampshire that shows all the different community colleges and all the different 4-year colleges and how those credits might transfer based on the history of how those transferred before. There's different databases also that'll show for different states, and there's a lot of different online tools that students can have access to, and in most cases, I think it's safe to say their advisors, wherever they're starting off at, will know what those tools are and can give them access to it. Or if they don't know, the individual colleges will also have their own database and list of schools and credits that are coming into us and how they've come in before and in what classes those will take the place of. So there's a lot of different things that people can be taking advantage of that really make sure, again, the process is as smooth as possible.
A related question. It's not uncommon to be a part of conversations with students, with parents as well, who talk about perhaps the lack of direction or undefined direction that a student might have at the end of his or her high school career. While they have the academic achievement and they might have the prerequisite activities and all those things that you would be hoping for to admit a student to your college or university, there is that uncertainty. What do I want to do? What would you recommend to a student who asks you that question? You know, I could get into this program. You know, they could project themselves in such a way that, you know, it could be, nothing's a sure bet, but it's likely that they'd be accepted. What would you say to that student? Are you seeing that on your campuses, students coming on campus and just really not having that sense of direction?
Sure. So being a liberal arts college, we welcome those who are really unsure. I joke that our largest major is undeclared. We have lots of students who come in and have an idea of what they want, but I think sometimes they're just not confident enough to know that they can be successful in that program. So we have a whole special advising program for students who are undeclared to come in and maybe sit in on classes and meet with faculty from different departments and students from different majors to be able to explore a little bit and wander and sort of take some time to figure it out. The majority of our students, many of them will change their major at least once during their 4 years at St. A's, and we welcome that. We welcome a dual major, selecting a minor. It's okay to come in and think you know you want psychology because you loved your AP psych class in high school, and then sit in on a college psych class and say, not a chance, and to change your mind. That's perfectly fine. So we welcome that at St. A's. I think that is the benefits in some ways to a liberal arts education. With that being said, it is tough for students who maybe are on a sort of a specific path. They think they want this career, and then maybe they choose to enroll in an institution that is much more specific or does require you to declare a major on your application. That's kind of a different conversation, but it does happen, and it is still okay. It's okay for students to, if they want to call it a mistake, it's okay that a student thinks that they want engineering or maybe nursing and then decide after a couple of classes or a year that they want to do something else. The transfer, as you know, kind of, I guess, relates back to transfer. It is okay to transfer. Students do it all the time because of a change in an interest in a major, or because the school doesn't have the major that they now want, that they figured out sophomore year. So, you know, we work closely with a lot of colleges to be able to help students to get where they need to go. We'd love for them to stay with us for 4 years. Obviously, that's the goal. We want them to be happy with us. At the same time, if they want a different program that we don't have, we support them to make that transition, and we can help them connect with other colleges and universities to be successful in the area that they now are choosing to pursue.
Like UNH, we have a very substantial number of undeclared students, about a third officially at the point of entry, but I'd argue that the true and accurate figure is probably closer to 60 or 70% based on major changes. And we have 6 college divisions. Each of the college divisions has an undeclared option for help kids figure out what they want to do. But I think to your question, to the point, a lot of the processes that colleges have in place are really there to try and acknowledge that high school graduates are unfinished products. They're not necessarily sure what they want to do, which is perfectly appropriate given the age and experience. And that part of the goal of college is to help them go from that undeclared state to a more decided or declared state further down the line. So the academic advising, the mentoring, the career counseling, all those things combined to try and provide some support and direction for the students, and really a lot of the co-curricular opportunities are all designed to really help students reinforce their understandings of what's important to them, acknowledging that their goals can and in many cases will evolve during the course of their college career. And again, most of us have systems in place that allow for relatively easy and pain-free changing of majors throughout the college career, particularly early in the college career, to acknowledge this reality. So I don't think high school students in particular, as I'm sure as you all know, they shouldn't worry so much about this issue, that it'll take care of itself in due course, as long as they're really committing themselves to trying to better understand themselves and what they're interested in.
So what we do at Northeastern, traditionally we used to be more of a school you really should come into a specific program, and you certainly still can. What we've developed over the last few years, we call it NU Explore, which is just a fancy name for our undeclared program. Students can be in NU Explore up to 2 years, essentially kind of bouncing college to college, getting a taste of everything. Most students, I'd say probably after a year or so, have found a home or have found a passion. Other things that we've done to try to make life a little more painless, Ryan, I'm struggling with the same word. You know, we do, for students who declare a major, you know, we do place them in it, we place them in that college, but they're accepted to the university. So it's very, very easy to switch majors, to switch colleges. We have also incorporated many dual majors, where it's not a full double major, they are combined majors, but they are across colleges, because many times students come out of that NU Explore saying, well, there's 2 things that I love. So we work with them to try to make that happen, where they do have a dual degree when they're done, and it's really because, you know, I find some of the students coming out of high school saying, oh, I absolutely want to be an engineer. are the ones who end up going into psychology. They're the ones who end up going into, biomedical fields just because they had never been exposed to it before. So I would definitely echo, students should not be losing sleep over saying, I need to know what I want to do. Or, another piece we sort of got rid of, we've made it very easy to transfer because there's always been that idea of sort of gaming college admissions. Well, I want to be an engineer, but I'm going to apply to theater arts because less kids will apply to that. So what we do, essentially, it's the same standards to get into engineering as it is to get into theater arts. And that's to discourage that. I'm going to pick the easiest one to get into because you really should be applying to what you're passionate about. And if you're not sure, then that undeclared program is absolutely acceptable.
I'm going to, you want to add one last piece to it?
I was just going to add that we certainly have a large number that come to us undeclared as well, and it's a great opportunity. And I should say, rather than undeclared, they do still have to select a major. It is on the application, but a liberal arts, a general studies, there is specifically open room in that curriculum to be able to explore and take an intro to business or an intro to criminal justice just to get a taste of those kinds of areas. But part of the discussion also with students is to understand, especially at a school like NHEI where they're 2-year degrees, is that if the student changes their major, they're not always going to be able to finish within that time span. So it's not that they're being penalized, but certainly there are courses that, again, to use business as an example, an accounting class is not necessarily going to be applicable towards an engineering program. So understanding that they may need to change or alter their academic plan. It's a little bit different, as I said, than the 4-year route where there is a little bit more room with the general education courses to be able to explore more in that first year and still be able to complete on time. So that might be an issue more at the community college level for students looking to complete a degree. But certainly that's part of the conversation, whether they're trying to do a 2-year degree with us or to transfer, is, okay, trying to think about what that pathway might be early on. If they're in liberal arts, general studies, to take their college success seminar where they do career exploration as part of it to kind of narrow down that pathway a little bit more early on if possible, just to keep them as on track towards that ultimate goal.
Yeah, for that student, I think the first thing I would say is you're not alone. I think so many of us have said that we have large portions of undeclared students. I'd like to try to de-stress the student as much as possible, so you're not alone. And second, to leverage us. So any institution that you're interested in, reach out to them and ask to be put in touch with an academic advisor who works with undeclared students, a current student at that institution that started off undeclared and has found their path, so that that big question mark, the great unknown, becomes demystified, that they have some stories and it helps provide a little bit of clarity that it is possible. So it's the great unknown, I think, is the most stressful part.
Thank you. So I want you to, the nature of this dialogue we're having here is that we're jumping. We're jumping beyond the admission stage into the cultural stage, being at the school and how you navigate. I'm going to ask a question that it emerges in all of the teachers submitted questions for today. It emerges in our faculty meetings. It emerges at our lunchrooms. It's huge. And it's the idea of students who are not producing work on time, not producing all their work. Just bear with me, because it's maybe not something you see in your world, but it's something we deal with in our world. And so the frustration we have in our world, and just bear with me a little bit, is a student who is not functioning in a timely way, leveraging a competency model that we're attempting to use, which allows for retakes and allows a student to sort of move ahead. So on our end, we have this frustration. The frustration deals with how do we send that message to a college, for example? How do we articulate that as part of this admissions process? We have questions about the student who adapts to our world and maybe handing things in a less timely way, but still does well on paper. Will they get up to you and get blown out? Will they not? Will they no longer, when they're freshmen or sophomores, that's not there anymore. So I don't want you to talk about what classes look like, bear with me, as a sophomore at your school, but wearing your admissions hat. Okay, so here you are, you're looking at candidates, and you already articulated it, you're looking at a candidate and say, is this person demonstrating the qualities that's going to be successful at Dartmouth, at UNH, at Northeastern, whatever it is. Help us as best you can, and pass on it if you want, get a handle on this dilemma that we have on how do we tell the story of students, balanced with you being a filter to your particular institution, and then your speculation on when they get out into your institution, if they do so, will these qualities make them successful? Will they adapt to the new environment? And again, I know this is a vague question, but I knew if I don't cover this question, this is a question that is on many, many people's minds in this audience. So if anybody wants to add in the audience, want to clarify my question, feel free. It's one of the hardest ones I had to sort of word, because I don't want you to be the teacher at your college. I want you to be the admissions counselor at your college. So who wants to take it? Anybody?
That is a big question. I guess there's a multi-part answer to your big question. I mean, ultimately, we're going to trust you in terms of, whether you think a student is prepared, is strong enough. This is where the high school counseling staff is so important in terms of steering kids to a school that may be a good fit. But ultimately, you know your kids, and I did live in your world for a long time, and I know that struggle. You know your students, you know what they're capable of. When they get to college, I guess this is another two-part answer. I mean, if they have had ed plans of any kind that allow for extra time, that is something we'll work with. At Northeastern, we have a very active, very big disability center. And we have many students who come in who are granted extra time, who are granted retakes. But that is in a more formal setting. I mean, some students who come in, they will struggle. If they're coming in, again, it's a big university, the faculty can be very different sometimes, but there is a legitimate challenge to students. If that option has always been there, to do retakes, to sort of have some flexible timing, it would really be imperative for the counseling staff here to make them understand that that's not always going to be the case. We definitely do not want to set our incoming students up for failure. And again, I'm not saying your students can't adjust from one to the other. Many will, but some won't. We do certainly have faculty members who are not the most flexible human beings on earth. And they, on appearance, are not always the most compassionate people. So it's very important. I mean, we'll trust your opinion that this student is ready, but you really have to feel comfortable.
The challenge we
with that.
face, I don't want to interrupt you, but the balance is what is our culture? And this is not a question for you, it's sort of a question for us, is ironing out what our culture is and how that we transfer that culture into a tool to give you a vision of our students that you would never be able to capture by simply looking at an old-fashioned transcript. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it is a fine, very, very odd issue that we're trying to deal with. Anybody else up there want to tackle this?
Sure. So in our academic setting, we have a 10-week academic term. It moves very, very fast. It's very high demand. And so I think you raise a really important point, because the student needs to be able to keep up. And a student who is not timely with their work in a 13, 14-week semester system, when we're down to 10 weeks, they have even less room for error or delay and so I think this point about counseling students is important in terms of what you're going to get into in our community. And I think the other thing is the faculty will expect students to keep up, and what you have described is not what our faculty are used to seeing. They're used to seeing students being ahead on projects, and even if they're interested in help, it's often consulting with a faculty member well before something is due to resolve any questions about what are the specifics of the assignment and so forth. So in the admissions process, I think if we're given cause to be concerned about that, we will respond. And I think it's helpful and appropriate on the counseling end, and then on in the development of the candidacy itself, to be clear about what that student's highlights are and what that student's areas of growth are. Now, that said, there's a teacher recommendation workshop that I've done where one of the examples that I use is a teacher recommendation that talks about a student who is deeply engaged, very lively conversationalist, really does a great job in the classroom setting and on projects, but is sometimes uneven in getting things in on time. And it's a recommendation from a candidacy that was successful because that was the outlying piece of data. All right, so if you're in a class sometimes and you're kind of shaving your investment in that class a bit because of other significant investments that you have that are consuming a lot of time, all right, we can get that if we have that whole picture. When something like that's the outlier, it's not death in and of itself to the candidacy.
And I think that when I want to clarify my reference too, that the reference that a teacher or school counselor provides is a thorough piece. It is, someone's taken the time to sort of write something, answer the question. The dilemma this audience faces is that they are deeper into the sausage-making machine, as I call it. They're out producing so we're attempting to collect normalized data on self-direction. Right, so a perfect example, what you referred to is, so that particular student in their travels here may have 30 teachers who are assessing self-direction if we were at a mature point, all right? And we had a clear definition of self-direction. So it's not going to be the reference. It's not going to be in that sort of traditional reference that existed when I was a kid. It's going to exist in a subtlety of a reporting mechanism that migrates to the transcript, that you may see self-direction on a 4-point scale as a 2. I'm making this up. And that may be the only piece of data you have because the school, with respect to the person writing the reference, they may have been chosen to give the reference because they may not see that side of that student. So I want to just, as you answer this question, contextually understand from a faculty standpoint, it's different than a reference. It is not, the reference is too controlled. It's going to be coming out in a different thing. Obviously, our school counselors listen to the teachers. That's not the spirit of my question. But from a teacher perspective, they have limited tools to tell that story, and it's going to manifest itself in some habits of mind, work study practices, called New Hampshire, piece of the puzzle. So I'm not sure you need to answer this, but I just want to refine the system of this audience, which is disproportionately a number of teachers who are in a room attempting to tell a story about a student.
Right, but I think I understand what you're saying, and I think where I'm trying to go with this is that students develop and grow over the course of their high school experience, and they'll mature and presumably get improve on these kinds of measures over time, and we're going to expect that, and we're also not going to expect them to be finished products, as Rob was saying before. So I think my point is it's okay for the peach to have a blemish. I think the question is how much of, how does that fit within the larger context? So for there to be some potholes in the road, so to speak, is fine. I think it's how does where is the student today, and where does that pothole fit in the road, so to speak? I mean, if it's the outlier, it's the outlier. If it's the dominant theme, it's the dominant theme. And I think transparency with the colleges to which students are applying is most helpful for identifying that best fit.
Those are really good points and a really interesting question. I think two thoughts. One is that this may, if this direction that you're going in becomes more of a broader theme across the country, it may change the way we in admissions share information with academic advisors. So again, if a student has demonstrated some behaviors that would suggest that he or she is less timely with their submission of their work or keeping up to date on what has to go on in the class, that might be helpful for an advisor to have that information early on. But the other thing I'd share is that one of the, I think, interesting things, and this is going back to the central tenet of an admissions process, can this student be successful at our institution using whatever measures the institution decides to use, is that kids are coming from thousands of different high schools across the country. They're not all arriving at college at the same state of readiness. They have different skill sets, they have different behavioral issues in terms of how they approach their academics. And those differences tend to work themselves out or level themselves out during the course of the first semester, because fundamentally these kids are bright people. They know why they're in college for the most part, and that's seen in retention rates and graduation rates at respective institutions. So that kid, for example, whose writing skills may not have been as fully developed as their peer, over the course of that first semester is going to have to work a bit harder, and they generally have the wherewithal and the motivation to do so, and that puts them in a more competitive position once they get to the end of that first semester, such such that those variations in individual academic skills can, not always, but they can modify and become more moderated over the course of that first semester, first year of college. So you do see, for example, at UNH, the cumulative GPA of first-year students is lower than sophomores, which is lower than juniors, which is lower than seniors. Kids are getting better at becoming college students. They learn the behaviors that they need to exhibit in order to be successful. And I would echo what was mentioned earlier about faculty. They can be unsympathetic to the plight of handing something in late. They may not care, and they'll just say, you failed the assignment. So that's a different world. I don't think the challenges that I've heard you discuss about Concord High School are unique to Concord High School. I think these behaviors, and I have an 18-year-old at home, and I can state very clearly that they exhibit and manifest themselves at other high schools, and it's the source of eternal frustration for parents, but also for teachers. But we also know our kids, and we also know our charges in our professional lives, that some students are ready for the challenges and demands of a baccalaureate environment or an associate's degree environment, and you guide them accordingly. Some kids aren't ready for college at all based on their past behaviors, and that's fine, and hopefully they'll evolve to a point where they can, in fact, benefit from some post-secondary education. But I do think the issue is a local issue, but I don't think it's a unique issue. But I also think colleges generally are cognizant of that issue, but they also have policies, procedures, and cultures in place to help shape that young person's approach to their academic life, and hopefully the student's going to be successful. So at UNH, we lose in the first year probably about 5% of our kids are asked not to come back at the end of the first year. You look back on those kids who are asked not to come back, it's hard to find a correlation between the work they did in college and the work they did in high school. Meaning they were pretty bright kids, and ultimately it's a matter of choices. Either they didn't have quite the right fit with UNH, or they made poor choices. They decided not to do the homework, they decided not to go to class, they decided to make poor social choices, any number of different possibilities. But it's usually not a matter of, in our opinion, it's not a matter of ability, it's a matter of choice and application of their own abilities. So that's, I think, something to consider, and something to remind ourselves of. Again, I think they're evolving, so that kid who may have got the mean score of 2 for their management of their time, whatever the example you provided, may be a work in progress. Maybe they're going to get better at it as they get to college.
Anybody else on that question?
I was just going to add a brief kind of anecdote. A friend of the family's son was a Concord High student. I spoke with him a couple months ago and was going over transcripts with him, and fairly solid, mostly B's, some C's in there. And I was looking at his senior year grades, and his English 12 was a 54. And I said, you know, what's going on here? What's happening with this grade? And he's like, oh, you know, it's fine. I just haven't turned in my paperwork yet. And I said, well, you've really got to do that. You know, you really need to pass that class to graduate. And so we also had kind of a conversation about, you know, when you're in college, they're not going to come after you about turning in papers or turning in projects or being ready. That's going to be up to you. You're an adult. We're going to treat you as an adult. That's going to be your responsibility. We're here to help you. And we kind of went over, you know, resources and academic supports and had that whole kind of conversation. Last Monday, I ran into his mother and I said, oh, how are things going? Are you guys getting ready for graduation? Are you going to have a graduation party? Da, 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 da. And she said, well, we didn't plan a graduation party because we didn't know if he was going to graduate. And I said, what do you mean you didn't know? And she said, well, he just turned in his assignments for his English class on Friday. Literally the Friday before graduation. And I said, well, I guess we're going to have another conversation about what he needs to do to be successful. So even though we sometimes have those conversations and they say, yeah, I'm you know I need to do it, well, sometimes until they're in that position where push comes to shove, they're not going to do it. So
we know what you're talking about.
We're
loud and clear that. We don't need to over-explain it. We got that one down pat.
You know exactly what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, we got that one down pat.
So, you know, so we have those kinds of conversations, and a lot of times that first semester is a real shock to the system of having that expectation. So we're always trying to talk to them early on about being prepared, about the differences between high school and college expectations, and I think anything you can do to reinforce that is always going to be really helpful and appreciated, especially by those faculty in those first-year courses.
We have a few questions related to the category of, you know, how do we celebrate academic achievement? So let me begin with the question of class rank. Does it matter to you?
system.
Yeah. Or if so, yeah, is there another system that you would look to?
We don't use it as a part of our application review system, so.
Same here.
We don't use it either, so.
We look at it if it's provided, but it's being provided so infrequently now that it's very rarely much of a deciding factor. I mean, if someone lists it, we'll look at it, but it's having less and less impact every year because just so many schools are just doing away with class rank. I don't think it should be a concern for anyone.
I think class rank can be a very helpful tool, and it's I completely agree that fewer and fewer places are offering it, but still many places do. And I think it's important that class rank be used appropriately. And you know, one of the things that we can say about class rank is I think the same thing we can say about a College Board SAT score. There's a 30-point swing around any given College Board and kind of SAT score. So if that score is a 600, statistically speaking, that could be a 570, it could be a 630. And that's what the College Board is very clear about. And yet, boy, the student who has the 590 feels so much worse than the student who has a 610. The same thing can be said for class rank. It's not about number 1 or versus number 2 or even number 5 or that kind of thing. It's about it is one more indicator of how that student is performing within the context of their school community. And a student who has a lower number for their rank relative to a student who has a higher number for their rank, there are differences there, and rank can surface that and articulate that. The key point, I think, is that schools on the post-secondary side who are looking at rank use it appropriately, and I think that if a college or university is going to say, well, yeah, that this student has a rank that's 2 points or 5 points or whatever lower than this other student, well, we're not going to do that. And if their rank were only higher, that would make all the difference. I think that's that to me is not an appropriate use of rank, but to use it within the context of all the other information you have available, it can be helpful, it can be useful.
So if it were traded out with something like the Latin system where you acknowledged a summa cum laude, a magna cum laude versus this is my literal placement, do you see that as an improvement or of no value?
I think any of these indications are helpful, and and different schools do it in very different ways. There are plenty of schools that don't have rank that are doing exactly what you say, and then it means for some schools it's the top 20%, some schools have a break line at 10% and then at 5% and things like that. Those indications of a student being an outstanding performer within the school context we find are helpful.
Again, like the others, rank is, I think, shifting in its meaning and value depending on the circumstance and the school setting. So we see probably about 60% of our enrolling students are bringing with them a class rank, and obviously 40% aren't. That doesn't mean class rank's not valuable. I would agree with all of what Paul said. I think class rank, if you use it, matters only in the context of the high school, and it's the college's responsibility to understand that context. A high school could be very homogeneous, which would suggest that class rank would have less value because of the homogeneity of the academic achievement of the students, versus a heterogeneous environment where there's great disparity, great diversity in the achievement of their students. The measure of assigning a relative achievement is less critical to me as well. I don't really care about class rank per se, but knowing relative achievement and how that can be articulated or displayed from a high school is important to me. It could be done through a percentile distribution, it could be done through a scattergram, bar graphs, any number of different measures that different high schools use. But I do think that relative achievement within the context of a high school does give us a sense of that student's achievement and abilities, again, only viewed within the context of that high school. So again, I think it's up to the high school to decide which model works best for them. I think it's particularly true if you're moving towards a true competency-based model where the traditional grades no longer have the same value or meaning. I think if you did that as an institution, I think it would be helpful to colleges and informative for colleges if some measure of relative achievement were able to be shared from the high school to the colleges in question about particular students. So for example, what % of kids are highly proficient? What % of kids achieve the proficient rating on the first go-through of the class, acknowledging that a lot of students are allowed to retry until they achieve that proficiency rating given the goals of the school system, which again I think are very valid and very legitimate goals. Based on what I've seen in terms of competency-based models, I like what I see in terms of how it helps students achieve skill sets. But some relative achievement measures would be very helpful for us in terms of deciphering and understanding what a student has done through the course of their high school career.
Rank doesn't factor in for us.
I'm watching the clock here. We just have a couple minutes left. I was going over all the questions submitted, and we're sort of in the ballpark of touching all the ones that really targeted the transcript and competencies. So I'm going to sort of follow the question as a little bigger picture. I read a memo from the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation about a month ago or so. Richard Ober, who's CEO, was using some data and essentially saying by 2032, the New Hampshire graduating class, which is approximately 14,000 students every year, will be declining by 30%, which is a symptom of northern New England in particular, as well as some of southern New England also. So you have declining number of students graduating high schools. So that 14,000 kids starts getting close to 11,000 kids in the state of New Hampshire. At the same time, we have a situation where students are applying to more colleges in the process of application. So here you are, and we sympathize. You're in this storm, right? You're trying to figure out how this all works. How does that data affect Concord High School? How does that affect data of the students graduating Concord High School? How does this sort of changing environment that you don't control affect how students apply? How does it affect your view of them? As we have had declining enrollment to some degree, but other schools have had it more significantly.
Do you mean in the admissions landscape?
In the admissions landscape, yeah. I imagine you're sitting in a room talking about there's less of a pool. And how does that, does it not? Does it simply mean that you're getting more students from other countries? Does it, what happens to that, we used to produce X number of students. We're going to, if Richard Ober is correct, in 10 years we'll have 30% less, and we've had less every year for the past decade anyhow. How does that affect admissions?
I think it's going to lead, and has been leading people to try to draw on wherever the students are coming from. So if they're coming from out of state and they see a state that is exporting more students than they're retaining, they might put more efforts into there. For someone like myself, where my territory is just New Hampshire, that means I'm going to work even harder to try to bring in as many of my New Hampshire students and serve as many New Hampshire residents as I can. So I think it's going to vary from school to school, and I think it depends on where the students are. We're seeing more schools, including Plymouth State, where we're traveling out west more than we have before. We opened up new territories in California, Colorado, Nevada, and Utah, and we previously hadn't traveled there in the last 2 years, but we're seeing similar demographics of students that are successful here and want to be here, so we'll go there.
The other challenge, the challenges are going to vary from institution to institution depending on their mission, their control. So we're a public institution in New Hampshire. We have an obligation to serve New Hampshire residents as best we can. That isn't challenging given the demographics that were just shared, but it's also challenging given the number of students who choose to leave New Hampshire for their post-secondary education. Well, I think last figures I saw, only about 22% of New Hampshire graduates are staying in state for their baccalaureate experiences. That's a challenge for us, and we have to work hard to make sure we're sharing opportunities and values and making it accessible financially to residents of New Hampshire, given the state's precarious finances and the choices made as a citizenry about how we choose to spend our tax dollars. The other issue, though, I think from a student perspective, which I think is worth considering, is the impact on students and their ability to make decisions. I think one of the unintended consequences of this demographic decline, particularly in the Northeast, is that colleges are becoming very, very aggressive in reaching out to students. I'm not sure students decision-making abilities have grown proportionately to the ability of us colleges to provide information to them in all sorts of manners. And I think that's a larger challenge, is can these kids process information in a way that makes it reasonable for them to make informed and useful decisions? My own opinion is I'm not sure they are. I think you look at the amount of literature mailed out, emails, texts, videos, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Although the technology's improved for them, their ability to process that information probably hasn't changed a whole lot over the last 30 years. So I think that's a larger challenge as it affects student decision-making ability and ability for them to make rational, thoughtful, good choices that ultimately will benefit them during their college careers. And that's an area I think where high school faculties and counseling staffs and colleges can partner to make sure that we're approaching this process in an ethical, appropriate, professional manner.
One thing I think about for very, very selective New England colleges and universities that are national and global in their catchment areas, I don't know that it has much tangible impact on the individual applicant, because New Hampshire is one small part of a much larger geographic picture for us. And so while there may be fewer applicants to any one of these schools from New Hampshire, the schools are still looking at those candidates. I mean, we spent all of our time talking about the localized context, but for the schools that are national and global in their pools, that's a whole nother wing of the evaluation process, is how does this individual candidacy stand within the pool as a whole. And so the demands of that competition are still very, very steep.
So for the community colleges, it's a little bit of a different situation, because certainly, like all public institutions, the goal is to service the members of our community and the New Hampshire population in particular. 95% of our students are specifically from New Hampshire. So with those declining demographics, and certainly with unemployment numbers at a record low, that's decreased significantly the number of potential students applying for our college. So that's a major concern at our institution, certainly. So the things that we have been looking at are ways to attract more students as a first choice option, and that could be doing things like looking at different programs that have, different careers that they can get into more quickly with an associate degree, changing different kinds of majors, opening up doors for apprenticeships, but also looking at, for a lot of our students that are not as well prepared. In the past, they might have had to do almost a whole year's worth of remedial math courses or things along those lines. We've developed a co-requisite model where students can join into the first year English composition or the first year topics in applied college math with additional supports and help from our academic Center for Excellence. So trying to shorten the amount of time they're in school and just kind of make that a little bit more attractive for students, that there is that opportunity, that they're not going to necessarily have to do long periods of remediation in order to be successful or complete their degree on time. Again, working with partners to create more clear-cut pathways to the four-year degree is also one of those areas that we've been working on to, again, give those students more opportunities at a community college.
I would mirror, our situation is similar to what, Dartmouth is looking at. We are looking at a very national and international applicant pool. So the demographic shift in New Hampshire, I don't think, is harming or benefiting any of your students. I mean, they are still coming into a competitive environment. It is such a broad candidate pool that those changes are not really going to be significant to the individual applicants coming from New Hampshire.
Great. As we are now approaching the end of our panel discussion, I'd ask each of our panelists to imagine that we are an audience of high school students. And it's my hope that as we've taped this discussion this morning, my hope is that our students are going to be viewing it at some future date. What would be your message to our high school students? As they are, the full range from 9th grade students right up to our 12th grade students.
Engage. develop self-advocacy, utilize your resources, and explore.
That's hard to top. That was good. This will sound quite silly, but after a conversation I had with colleagues last week, I think it's very fitting. But picking up the phone and being able to have a conversation with us on the admissions side, or once they get to college, I know that sounds quite silly, but to be able to communicate effectively with adults that you will be interacting with on a regular basis, it's a skill that I'm sure you probably see quite regularly, but to be able to just to do that on your own and be confident in it, I think is a big stepping stone to being successful really in life. So I would love to be able to speak more with students on the phone and via email. I love their parents, but I would love to hear from the student a little bit more. So.
What I would stress to all of your students or any high school students is to really keep their options open. I think some students approach college sort of with a lot of self-limitation. No one in my family has ever gone outside of New Hampshire, so I won't look at that. I think students should really have their eyes open to a number of opportunities. There are thousands of colleges out there. They really should take a look and do some research, talk to their counselors. And what I tell students all the time, once you've narrowed that down a bit, the most important thing to do is to visit the schools you're considering. Every college has its own personality, it has its own vibe. The city of Boston, we have many schools. If you visit Northeastern BU and BC, you will have 3 completely different experiences. The schools feel completely different. So that's one of the things I stress to students the most. Again, if it's possible, if they're considering UCLA and they don't have the money to go to Los Angeles, I understand. But if they have any ability to visit a school and speak with the students there, that is so important.
And I guess I would agree in just exploring your options, thinking about where you see yourself in the next 5, 10, 15 years, what you could see yourself doing, get into kind of exploring career opportunities fairly early on. You might find that there are opportunities very close by, local, close to home, whether it's a community college or four-year college or what have you, but to kind of think about where you could see yourself and kind of start drawing a pathway to get there.
So this is to the students?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
Okay. So you're amazing. I think that's the first thing. Don't ever forget that. And you're surrounded by people who are really rooting for you here. You have amazing resources in the classroom and your counseling staff. And you also have tremendous, tremendous choice. And it might not feel that way sometimes, but you do. And so I would encourage you not to lose sight of both all that you have to offer, all that Concord has to offer you, and all that the wide array of post-secondary options have to offer you. And so just encourage that awareness and the optimism that comes with that, and to take advantage of the resources that are available. Reach out, ask questions, and I think working together with the folks here, you'll be able to realize what it is you're hoping to do.
I'd encourage students to try and look beyond some of their more natural tendencies, and that is to try and take appropriate risks. Step out from the comfort zone that you've established within the high school community. Try something new. And that could be anything. It could be a class, it could be a club, it could be a friend, it could be an experience outside of the high school. And try to postpone worrying too much about the transactional nature of applying to college. That'll come in due time. To the extent that they can benefit and fully engage, for lack of a better term, in the high school experience, that would be ideal, and I think could lead to some very wonderful experiences and some wonderful growth and increased awareness about possibilities just by looking around the walls of Concord High School and Concord, New Hampshire. I know a lot of kids sometimes feel that their hometown is too small for them and they need to spread their wings and all that, but at this moment in time, I think the high school opportunities are wonderful, and they should try to avail themselves of them by, again, stepping outside that comfort zone, which is counterintuitive for most high school kids, but to the extent that they can do that, that would be a wonderful thing to see.
My advice would be making sure they put their full effort at all times, all 4 years, into their academics. I'm of the mindset that at the end of the day, every piece of the application is important, but the most important evaluation that we can give is on their academics, because that's really a big showcase of what they've been doing for their 4 years in their time here, and making sure that regardless if it's a physical science class in their freshman year that they don't think is really going to have a big impact in the grand scheme of things, it does, because every class does matter. So making sure they put their full effort into all their classes, it's important. Kind of going back to the anecdote that Deneen had earlier, if I receive a transcript and there's a 54 in their English 12 class and it's simply because they haven't turned in their assignments, well, the evidence in front of me is you have a 54 in your English class, and that's not the best way that you should be showcasing yourself. So making sure, again, if I'm sounding repetitive, it's on purpose, that they're putting their full effort into all of their classes at all times. My other piece of advice would be making sure they're thoughtful of their recommenders, because we do take those recommendations seriously, and making sure they're picking someone that is going to be giving a good analysis of how they've been developing in their community. If I see a school counselor, which we do see this occasionally, where they're saying that I don't feel this person is ready for a full residential 4-year experience and I don't think they're going to be successful, I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind. Or on the other hand, if they say that they are perfectly ready and they're going to be a standout citizen in your community, that's a really great thing to see too. And the last thing, I think it's coming back to the point earlier that Julie made with communication. It's really important. For some reason, it seems like every year, more and more students are almost petrified to pick up a phone and talk to us, and they'd rather do it interfacing through text messages or something like that, or even approaching me physically in person and just saying hi is wonderful when they do that, because so few of them are actually doing that. So don't be afraid to come up and see us. We're actually pretty friendly, as you can see. So those are my 3 points that I'd like to hit home.
That's great. I want to take this time to thank our invited guests really for making time for us to assist us in a conversation that has been ongoing at Concord High School. I'm struck just by the nature of all of our work. It's ongoing. It doesn't stop. There are these moments of catching our breath and taking a rest. You're doing that at the end of a busy school year yourselves, and I'm very grateful for the time that you've given us this morning.